What's up, ninjas? Welcome to another episode of the Exposure Ninja Digital Marketing Podcast. My name's Tim Cameron Kitchen, head ninja at Exposure Ninja and best-selling digital marketing author. This show is all about helping you to generate more leads and sales through your website. And in this episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Yaro Starak. Now, Yaro has come onto the show to talk about blogging, but not business blogging, actually using a personal blog to turn yourself into a bit of an influencer in order to build an audience, in order to sell your products, your services, and even sub-businesses that you set up or businesses that you then set up further on in future. So it's a kind of different approach to how most people approach blogging as a digital marketing strategy for their business, where they'll be writing on their business's blog. Yaro's taken a very different approach where he's actually building his own personal blog and then basically turning himself into an influencer in order to sell his business. So really interesting approach. And there's something here that we can all learn if we're interested in putting ourselves or even somebody else in the business forward as the figurehead, if you like. So really cool episode. I love talking to Yaro. He's a very switched on guy. Don't forget also, they tell me to remind you, go and check out Exposure Ninja on our YouTube channel. Now, on our YouTube channel, if you're not already watching this on YouTube, if you're already watching it on YouTube, then of course, subscribe and click the notification button. But if you're not watching this video on YouTube, if you're listening to the audio on Stitcher or iTunes or whatever, then go and check out youtube.com/Exposure Ninja. We got loads of videos on there. We make loads of cool new videos about how to do different parts of digital marketing, some behind the scenes stuff as well. I'll show you some of the campaigns that we build and give you some tips to grow your business online. Also check out Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We've got social media posts all over the place. We're pumping out Exposure Ninja content into the world. So if you like our little mascot Shinobi, go and Shinobi yourself to oblivion on Instagram.com/Exposure Ninja. Don't forget also, if you want some help growing your website's leads and sales volume, then go to exposureninja.com/review and request a free marketing review from one of our team. No Shinobis in that, but it's still genuinely awesome. Anyway, that's enough of me, Exposure Ninja and Shinobi. Here's the show with Yaro Starak. Yaro, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
So for those listeners who don't know you already, who are you and how do you make money?
That story's getting very long. I went online in 1998. That was my first ever website. So it's been, a 20-year journey now as we're talking. But predominantly, at least for the last 12 or 13 years, I've been known as a blogger, and I've made certainly the majority of my income from a blog. And when I say that, obviously, it's not specifically like the blog's the traffic source, the audience building source, the trust building source. It's how I've reached people. It's probably why I'm even talking to you on this podcast. But I've sold my own course. I've had a few courses over the years, ebooks and a membership site. That's kind of been the main thing. Prior to that, I had an online editing company, a little e-commerce store selling Magic the Gathering cards. You're more nerdy listeners might know that game. And right now I'm in charge of a company called Inbox Done that helps people with their email. That's a service provider. But yeah, blogging is kind of like the glue that keeps everything together.
So when most listeners are thinking about blogging, they're thinking about, I've got a business and on that business's website, there's a tab called blog. And then I write topics that are super relevant for that business's audience. But you're coming at this almost like an influencer, and then you kind of build businesses to service your influencer's audience, right? So a slightly different way of doing it.
Yeah, you really nailed it. Especially in the most recent years, everything's been spun off because of the audience. So when blogging started, that was when social media started. So for me, it was 2004. There wasn't a Facebook, a Twitter. I think maybe there was Friendster possibly doing something around that time. I can't remember. There wasn't even YouTube with that sort of comment functionality. It was like you write a blog and then someone can leave a comment. And that was the dawn of social media, right? So it was also the good old days because that was the only place you could interact. So all discussions were basically in either blog comments or online bulletin boards and forums. And that's kind of where I learned about what communication is like online. So, I didn't come into this thinking I'm a journalist or I guess in some ways it's a benefit today, but maybe it's also a hindrance. We have all this marketing knowledge and all these people teaching how to use these content platforms. But for me with the blog, it was like, you know what? I'm not even sure what it is. It looks like a website. People are kind of talking about their breakfast or their boyfriend or their girlfriend or where they went on holiday. And I just started to talk about the subject I cared about, which is entrepreneurship, and the businesses I had back then. That editing company, that card game business were my muse, so to speak. But, it was all about just telling stories that you were interested in and sharing with this very organic style of transparent writing, which is what I love about blogging the most, is that sense of you can just tell your life story, be extremely egotistical. It's all about you, and yet people follow you. And ideally, you can build a business around that audience as well. So that's kind of what I did. I won't say it was all strategically planned. There was definitely some stumbling around and, figuring out that this could work in certain different ways. But yeah, it's still probably my favorite way to build an audience, online.
It's a strategy which is in some ways super old school in digital marketing terms because it happened so early, but also it's kind of come full circle. We've got people like Gary Vee now talking about documenting the journey and being just yourself in a blog and not blogging necessarily or posting as the business all the time, but kind of allowing your personality to kind of shape it and allow people to follow your story. I remember we had a guest on the show, I think Madhav Bandari from Hubstaff, and he was like their growth marketing officer person. And he did this really transparent blog where they took people behind the scenes of Hubstaff's numbers and showed like what was working and what didn't. And then he sent out an email recently saying, I'm moving on from Hubstaff. And I thought because of that transparency and because of that personality that he's shared, I'm now going to follow where he goes next in his business. Whereas most of the time, if a marketing manager of a company that you do business with moves on, you're like, oh, well, I guess that person's gone from my life forever. So,
yeah.
I mean, maybe you could talk a bit about why you think this blogging as a person works and why it's a good thing to do, even if you're blogging as the business.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one because people come at this from the sort of traditional marketing corporate world, and you would never, ever think about talking about your relationships, what you're having for breakfast, or behind the scenes, the good and the bad of a business. But that's kind of, what social media, blogging as well is all about. And I think part of it, and this is really good advice for anyone listening, trying to grow an audience today that actually buys from you. Let's face it, there is no other competitive advantage that's not replicatable other than your personality. So I really do believe that's one of the most powerful marketing tools we all have as individuals is our own story, our own voice, our own way of living and expressing and sharing that with people. And I didn't go into it thinking I'm going to be an influencer or anything like that. It was just, I want to tell a story. And there's so many uncanny things that happen to you. I remember once, early days, I started writing about how I moved into a new apartment and then my fridge broke. And I started attending some conferences or just like local meetups, and people would say, how's your fridge? And you're like, that's really weird. But they're paying attention to, your personal story. Yeah. And then, later on when, for example, for me, I'm selling a course, people say, yeah, I just followed you forever. And I just was, you were in my life in a kind of virtual way. And then when I finally was ready to do the thing that you taught how to do, of course, I decided to buy from you. It was a no-brainer. So I think that's the real secret there. It's kind of like being a part of people's lives, being interesting by sharing, teaching through sharing, and sharing the bad is a way better way to teach than sharing the good most of the time. So that kind of transparency leads to building an audience that cares, that follows you around, as you said, and then when it's time for them to make that buying decision, if they're deciding on something that's related to what you sell, they're going to, at least be aware of you and probably choose to buy from you as well. And that's a beautiful thing. And I think it's really important today because the internet is huge and very crowded. And it's all about having that small group of very loyal followers. There's so many phrases for it. That 1,000 True Fans by Kevin Kelly, that very old article that's still very relevant, I think. And that's the same thing I've followed for most of my blogging career, just having that hardcore group of people who buy what I sell, love to learn from me, love to buy from my newer companies. Even like our first two customers for my email management business came from long-term blog relationships. They were reading the blog and buying my courses first. So, it's all very connected to that transparency and that audience. And we should also say, like, the one thing that's necessary to include here, it's not just like magic. You start sharing about your life. I owe Google a huge debt of thanks because sure, I shared these stories and I wrote a lot of how-to content, but Google ranked that stuff and continues to rank those articles and, the content I produce well, so that you get the discovery process, that the person discovering you, and I'll be honest, some of it during the early days was much easier to rank for than it would be today. You just had to blog, you just had to write articles, and if you had a blog, you'd get some great rankings. But I think the principle is still the same. You produce valuable content, you go for long tail terms, very niche specific phrases within your space, and you can start ranking well. And that's the genius formula that I followed for over a decade. So
how, there's a couple of things you said that are really interesting. So we're getting traffic from organic search, and we'll ask about blog promotion later on. But in order to do that, you've obviously got to be talking about your topic of expertise or answering really relevant questions. And then you've got the broken fridge. So you're not trying to rank for broken fridge Toronto, right? So how do you balance that need to share the behind the scenes and the personal with that need to be valuable in order for people to actually care in the first place?
Yeah, I'll give you the ideal answer. I'm certainly not a person who practices this with every single blog post I've done. And for me, it's been a learning process too. I think there's probably way more fridge stories early on that didn't rank for anything. And then I eventually realized maybe I should write top 10 ways to get traffic to your blog and, those sorts of things. But the genius, I think this is, a great writing technique for today that kind of melds these two ideas. So, I start talking about my personal life and how my fridge is broken down and how that's impacted my life. Maybe I realize, wow, I've only got enough food to live on for 24 hours. And I can sort of transition that to say, what about your online business with my topic, let's say, or your blog? If you only have an audience that pays attention to you for 24 hours because all you're doing is posting on Instagram or Facebook and that content disappears within 24 hours, it's like your fridge is broken down. Tomorrow, you've got no one paying attention to you. So I'm a big proponent of creating these sort of long-term evergreen pieces of content. So next month, next year, they can still be getting attention, bringing in audience, which is not going to come from Instagram or Facebook. That post is gone 24 hours later. So it's like me making sure my cupboards are stocked with, cans of tuna and other food when my fridge breaks down. So kind of, I could bring in my personal life and then relay a lesson. Now, I probably wouldn't put the title tag, my fridge breaks down, what I learned from that, because that might hurt the rankings. But, it could be something like, are you getting, what are you creating content for long-term traffic? I'd obviously have to massage that, but it would be tied into that. So it's personal story mixed with how-to lesson. And I certainly have done that a lot over the years. As I said, though, if you go into my blog, you will find like we're cleaning things up now because it's obviously 2005. There's a lot of stuff that a very young Yaro was writing about during the early days that makes no sense whatsoever for the current, situation. But yeah, it's certainly a technique I'd recommend for people listening. That would be the way I'd write now.
Cool. So all those posts praising Donald Trump's incredible business acumen slowly being worked out.
Yes.
So I can hear the objections from listeners, or whether they're an objection now or whether it's just purely the reason that they're not going to start doing this. They're going to be saying, but my life isn't interesting enough. Like, I don't even my fridge doesn't even break. I'm not particularly struggling. Go and break your fridge. I seem to be fairly comfortable. My life just isn't something that people are going to find interesting. So how do they need to overcome that?
Yeah, that's probably the most common response I get when I talk about being personal. It's like, no, thank you. I have no desire to share anything whatsoever online. And they're not social people either. They don't do Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, or, so starting a blog and going that deep into their personal life, not going to happen. So, I think it's about a person within your company deciding to be that person, and maybe it should be the marketing person who's willing to share. And some of this is like, you can find some companies where you have no clue who's the leader, and then you've got some companies where you're very clear it's him running Exposure Ninja because he's always the face of the podcast, and you're probably way more on social and sharing more things in your life too. So I think part of this is a decision by a leader. And in my case, and certainly most of the people I've coached over the years, they've been an individual knowledge expert who's essentially selling their expertise. For them, it's a natural thing to do. I mean, I won't say it's a natural thing in terms of their comfort zone. I've had to certainly push some people to start talking more about themselves. But it fits what they're doing. I know how to do this thing. Let me talk about myself and then teach you how to do it. Now, if you're talking about selling some kind of widget, it might actually be better to be telling the personal stories of customers, not the leaders in your company. Let's talk about how the customer's fridge broke down and how you now sell this amazing, tin tuna that lasts for 100 years. And then you could just keep doing these kind of stories, and it relates to your physical product if you happen to sell tuna fish. But yeah, there's always a story to relate. It doesn't have to be yours. I think that would be the piece of advice I give. What's important is asking yourself. I used to do this all the time when I thought about a blog post. Like, how can I begin the article with some kind of hook that's related to a more personal story? Because that's what people want to read at the start. That's what gets the attention. If you go straight into facts, it's kind of, people don't get into the article. But then I needed to make sure that I, at some point, led them to something they can take away and learn from and do. Sometimes it was blatantly specific. Here's the 7 things I learned from this experience. Sometimes it was more strategic. So it might be one overarching concept, but there was always a lesson, always a how-to. And then, of course, it connected to something I sold as well. That's the way I saw the most ideal article. It was, here's a story about my current customer or my past customer. Here's a lesson that we can learn or several from that experience. And here's a product I sell, or here's a free opt-in I have that can help you do this or take you to the next step in this process. And that is literally how I recommend people spend their entire day when it comes to content creation. Just do that all day, and you will do well. As long as you work on your titles and get those keywords right, you can do really well with that content format.
That's fantastic. I think the other thing to bear in mind as well is that what seems mundane to people, actually, if you have a following, it's not as mundane to them. I look at some of the stuff. Yeah. My wife is into celebrities for some reason. It's fascinating to me, though. I'm glad. And I look at the stuff that she watches and that she reads about, and on the surface, I think, why do I care what clothes that person took to their holiday in the Maldives? But to her, it's extremely interesting. And it sounds mad if you look from the outside, but actually there are people that listeners will be fascinated to follow for a day and see what their daily routine looks like, right? It might, whether it's like a business leader or someone who's interesting in their personal life, the stuff that feels boring to you actually would be really interesting to someone who respects you or looks up to you.
Yeah, and I think that advice is good, but you do have to realize some people will never, ever want to share anything online. Like, it's just not going to happen, and they're never going to, they just do not feel comfortable doing that. So I think you raise a great point. I'm looking at traveling to Iceland coming up next month. And of course, I'm watching videos of people who travel to Iceland to figure out the best things to do. And I don't know these people, but I've discovered them on YouTube. And some of them now I'm starting to follow because they're travel vloggers. And I find that relevant to what I'm trying to learn about right now. Of course, they've been doing it possibly for years, and they've got travels from around the world, and I'm just discovering them today. But if they weren't interested in sharing that process, I would never have found them. The same token, there's plenty of companies out there full of people who've never shared anything, and they rely on the customers doing the sharing, the word of mouth. And that's fine too. I think it's just important you understand it's the personal storytelling from a human being that gets that differentiation, that creates the hook, that gets people caring about what you sell and what you do. And you've got to find it somewhere, especially online. I think maybe local marketing, face-to-face, it's still about personal relationships, but you don't need the internet. But if you're doing anything online and you want to reach a global audience, it's such a powerful tool to share stories. Like I sometimes feel like it's a real blessing to have been born in a time where I could sit on a laptop in a cafe and just talk about, what I'm thinking in that point in time. and that's called marketing, and that gets me customers. It's like, this is ridiculous, but it's a wonderful thing.
You said people share the bad stuff as well as the good. Why? Shouldn't our blogs just be like a carefully curated greatest hits compilation?
Yeah, I mean, we all know the answer to that. We never like watching someone who's always succeeding. We kind of hate them in some level, right? So I think, I think we actually love to see. We love to see not the fact that people fail, because that's painful for everyone, even those watching. But we also have that really innate curiosity about what they do next and how they recover, or what they did to change, because probably the reason why we're even paying attention to them is we see something in them in us. And, it could be we also want to lose weight, or we also want to break free financially, or we also want to get traffic to our blog if we want to go, really niche and granular, or I really want to plan my trip to Iceland. These are the things that connect us with that person. And learning the bad is really important, because not just to avoid their mistakes, probably the most important thing, but to see the process they went through. Because I think this is especially true for my experience, and I think a lot of bloggers who are teachers will say this. It's the process of getting realizing you have a problem, then discovering what's the root of that problem, and then doing experiments to try and solve that problem, and then emerging with a solution that feels like it's a journey. It's not a snap solution. And that for the individual is an experience, and that for the audience could be an experience too. That's why blogs like mine were, my blog was originally called Entrepreneur's Journey. It was a journey blog talking about my first companies, then my teaching business, and even now I'm talking about, my services company on there. So it's all kind of connected with that ongoing journey I'm going through. I think we've seen a lot of blogs, whether it's recovering from acne, it's trying to become an Olympic athlete. The Biggest Loser on TV is almost like a reality TV show that is a form of this kind of journey style blogging in a very compact form, how to lose a lot of weight quickly. And I think that's what matters. It's the process. And sure, I remember sitting down with a very young guy at a conference. I think it was like 14 or 12, and I was one of the speakers there. And from his point of view, it's, I'm a kid with no money. How do I suddenly get a lot of money? And he sat down with me, and I gave him a bit of time, and he's like, so what's the one thing I do to make a lot of money? And I'm like, well, there isn't one thing to do. There's a whole bunch of things to do. And he would not take that as an answer. He's convinced that there is a single thing that is the answer. If you could just get it out of me, then he'd have the secret to making money. And I'm like, I kept telling him, you got to do this, then this, then this, then this, then this. And you've got to kind of learn from every process. But in his mind, it's got to get to that end goal today. And that just doesn't happen. So, he'll go through, I'm sure since then, it was years ago, he's probably gone through his own journey. And we all have to do that. There's no getting away from the process, unless you're born rich, and then you have a different process to go through to figure out, your meaning and your purpose. So
there's also a part about vulnerability, isn't there? Because even if they don't see the eventual transformation, we got two princesses in the UK, right, who have just had babies. So you've got the older one, Kate Middleton, who had a baby, came out looking incredible. Word on the street is actually she's one of our clients to get that transformation, and that's unconfirmed. Looking incredible, and the nation's women who are into that thing seem to look at her and go, bitch. And then you've got Meghan Markle, who came out having had the baby, and she looked like she just had a baby. And the nation's females seem to let out this collective sigh of relief and this expression of love at Meghan because she was human. And we see it on social, don't we? When the social influencer posts a picture of themselves late at night with no makeup and just says, this is also me. And people love them more because they've shown that vulnerability and they've made themselves more real. So even if you don't have a transformation, it feels like that kind of, hey, do you know what? I really fucked this up, is actually quite endearing.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you certainly should not be afraid to go to that negative experience and talk about it and share. I mean, my mother passed away about 6-7 years ago, and she was in hospital for 2 years after suffering a stroke. And, I blogged quite a bit, not a lot, but definitely many times during that process and afterwards as well. And obviously that's a very, one of the hardest things you go through in life, losing a parent. And that was something that a lot of people then, just it's the continuation of my story that they followed along with. And there was nothing, actually, there was some business lessons I was able to extract from that experience too. But, it wasn't specifically, I'm not trying to sell a product or anything in that kind of storytelling. And, but yeah, I knew that would continue to keep that connection with my audience. But I kind of want to go back to your princesses example. I think it's interesting to think, imagine Kate Middleton is selling a product on how to recover really well after having a baby. And she steps out in the press. I just had a baby and I look amazing. And then you'd be like, bitch, but what did she use? I want to buy what she's got.
That's
right?
true. That's
and then
true.
Meghan Markle comes out, I don't sell a product. I'm just want to connect with the general people. And maybe she sells something else, and it's just, I'm just happy to follow her story. So I think obviously, at some point it'd be also beneficial for Middleton to have flaws in other areas. But I guess what I'm saying is there are stories to be told on both sides of the fence that can work for content marketing, for blogging. It's all about showing proof and the journey of what you're trying to represent to the world online, and not always being 100% on focus for product either. There's times to talk about yourself and there's times to campaign to sell a product. Stories should be involved in both, but I know for my life, most of the time I'm not in the middle of a marketing campaign. So that's when I can be writing about, I had a great experience about 10 years ago in 2008. I traveled around the world and I stopped in Athens. I was in a beach town called Vouloumeni, and I had a business partner back in Brisbane, Australia, where I was born, and we were running a campaign for a product. Now, what was cool, for the 7 or 8 months before I reached Athens, I'm writing about this whole, I'm in Singapore, I'm in New York, I'm in Paris and London, and that's all going on the blog. And it's like, wow, Yaro's really living the dream. And then I hit Athens, and now I'm selling a video course on how to make money blogging with Gideon. All the people that have come with me on this story are seeing constant proof. This guy must be making money if he can travel all the time. Here's my product now that I'm selling that's going to teach you the same, what I've been doing behind the scenes. So it's all kind of, I wouldn't say like it was my grand plan, my evil business plan to travel around the world so I could sell this course and have proof. But it sure helps, it sure helps to live an example of what you're trying to teach as well. So I think that's what's great. If I didn't share the travel stories along the way, it would have been less proof, probably less sales, I would have said as well, smaller audience afterwards too.
So I guess it's important that the kind of overarching image that you're sharing with people is positive and aspirational in some way, right? If you were just talking about the bad stuff the whole time, I'm guessing your audience would be like, well, I don't want to just hear about this guy whose fridge is always breaking and he doesn't get it fixed.
By the way, my fridge is fine now.
That's all right.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's a balance. And this is the thing I've told a lot of people who ask me this question. I'm trying to do something in my life and I'm not an expert yet. So I can't go online and say, hey, I've solved this problem. I know how to give birth and look perfect the next day. I'm still trying to figure that out. I'm going to have 10 babies and, solve this problem, right? So you have to be, it's okay to do that journey style content format, even when you still suck at something, but you better be doing something to get better. There's a lot of people who want to try and teach how to make money as their plan to make money, but they've never made money, right? And that doesn't work. And if you're not doing things that are actually starting to make some money, then, or at least experimenting towards that, you're not going to have a compelling story. You're going to be that guy who's complaining about the broken fridge. I can never, make money. So I think it's always best to do what's already working. That's ideal if you're already successful. But if you're still, a journey process, I mean, even if it's a physical product, so just talk about how you're going about getting that product made. What's the journey? And maybe, you have 6 or 7 beta versions of that product to get to the final one. But the people who came along with you are so, interested and so involved with whatever it is you're selling. They're going to be likely to, buy that final ready to go version. It's just finding the time usually becomes the challenge. How do I blog about this, create my product, to get a checkout system set up, marketing outreach? It becomes a lot for certainly a one person to do.
Absolutely. I've got some quick fire technique questions about blogging for you. So how often are you looking to post? What's more important, frequency or like sticking to a schedule?
I wish I could say this and tell you, I've been doing this the entire time, but
Oh, it's
I've
an
changed.
endearing flaw if you haven't.
Yes. Um, and I've got to be careful because there's what worked today and what worked yesterday and what worked for phase one and what works down the line. So I very much teach a system that's about leveraging email for automation. It's about getting people from the blog to your email list to sell what you sell. And the beautiful thing about that is you don't have to write, 5 days a week covering the latest news. I think I have this two different systems. I don't really teach one, but I call it news blogging. It's what we learned from the Mashables, the TechCrunches, the Business Insiders, all those sort of sites that they're covering everything. They're the new magazine. That's not possible for one person show. So I actually would recommend today to go deep. And even if it means you write once a month to start with, at least something really solid, a really powerful how-to article that will stand the test of time. I think that's the most important piece of advice. I don't mind as a coach to say, if you can write once a week, that's great. If you can write twice a week, that's even better. Hell, if you can do 5 times a week, amazing pieces of content, that's probably ideal. Most people can't do that, especially as one individual. So, aim for once to twice a week at the start, because you do need to kind of get momentum going. But I'll be flat out honest. I podcast now maybe twice a month. I maybe write once every 2 months. It's far less than when I started, when I was doing sometimes 5 days a week. Then it went 3 days a week. Then it was 1 day a week. But I'm leveraging the past content I wrote. So as we all know as entrepreneurs, it's unfortunately hardest at the start. We have no momentum. We have no asset created. It's like that snowball at the beginning of the mountain. You got to start pushing it to get that compounding and building it up. And it's the same rule for blog content as well. You've got to start building it up. Now, if you work best with a schedule, then certainly I'm all about accountability. And if you love that on the wall, you've got the calendar and I've got to publish this, and this, and that'll make you do it, I'm all for that. I personally do that when I had launch campaigns, but most of the time I've been more of I really want to write about this topic, but I'm going to see where it goes, but not give myself, this has got to be out on Tuesday or I'm screwed kind of story situation.
And post length, I'm guessing it depends on the topic, but do you have like a minimum length that you'd publish and a maximum?
I feel like there was the advice back in the day that 500 words was the sweet spot, but that was more for like newsy kind of content. Yeah. And now people will start saying it's 1,000 words because you need the space to go deep. I generally publish between 1,000 and 3,000. If it's looking to go over that, then I start breaking it into, part 1, part 2, part 3. I think this is a bit of a cheating answer. You need to write as many words as required to really give a good answer to a question and tell a good story. That's what matters. So I think this is great advice. If you feel like you've left content on the table that would actually help people because you're trying to squeeze it into 1,000 words to sort of fit some kind of rule, I would tell you to go to 2,000 or 3,000 and just produce a better piece of content. And, even adding images and video to get that multimedia aspect as well. If you, really think this is a piece of cornerstone content, as it sometimes is called, it's the most important subject for your niche. It's going to be that one article that you constantly reference to. Like, I don't know if you have one in your archives, Tim, like a post that you guys wrote that's a how-to for a fundamental aspect of traffic building online, and you always say go there first. That's the piece of content you really, really focus on. But then there's a time to do that, but there's also a time just to jump in quickly, tell I wrote a blog post that was really popular. I did a renovation of an apartment in Ukraine that I purchased a couple of years ago, and it was an absolute like a zombie massacre type apartment when I first bought it. It was really scary looking. The basement hadn't been touched by human beings in years. It was like a trash can. And I had all these before and after photos. I explained, why buy an apartment in Ukraine? That's really weird, but they're really cheap. They're like $50,000. So there's so many curious elements of the story. And I'm sitting there writing it, and it's turning into 3,000 words. And I'm like, this isn't really selling anything, but boy, did people like it. And again, it keeps them in my story. And I needed 3,000 words to tell the psychology of why am I choosing to buy in Ukraine? Why did I choose this dump? What did I do afterwards? How did I get it done when I don't live in Ukraine? All these aspects of the story that had to come out to really complete the picture of this story. And that was necessary. I couldn't do that in 1,000 words.
That's a great answer. Once you've written the posts, what are you doing to promote them and drive traffic and make sure people are actually reading them?
Yeah, and this is, there's two answers to this. There's the I have no audience yet, I need to go build my audience answer. That's when you're doing what you always do. You're looking to do outreach. I have a technique. I call it basically getting on other people's channels. I have a better word for that, but I can't remember right now. Outbound marketing, essentially. You're showing up in people's podcasts. You're doing guest posts. And all of that is bringing, that basic level of incoming links you need to start ranking well. Because if you don't have that, it doesn't matter how good your title is, obviously, or, you have to go ridiculously long tail to try and get a first page result on the search engines. And I really feel that more of a slow and steady wins the race answer for that part. You don't suddenly get all this exposure at once. It's you use exposure ninja. You slowly build up using various different techniques over time, right? And then you start to notice that as you publish a piece of content, it seems like it's less work each time to get an audience. Now, I'll give you my answer as well, which I think is you definitely want to do this. Your blog is what can capture that organic audience, but you need the mechanism to keep that audience in your world. And for me, that's always been email. By far has been the single best source of audience retention and audience conversion. The blog has been the best for audience discovery, but retention and conversion is primarily done through email. And that also includes, when I say retention, sending my subscribers to my new blog posts. So right now, if you ask me what I do to market my content, I just go to my existing audience, my blog subscribers. Well, my email subscribers will get it. My blog audience will get it. My social following will get it. And that will, mean my existing audience, which has grown over years, are continuing to experience my content. Now, that doesn't work if you're brand new because you have no existing audience. It's hardest at the start again. So that's when you have to do the things that grow your audience. Now, my advice, because I think I'm a huge fan of the 80-20 rule, and the one thing, if you've read these books, One Thing by Gary Keller, 80-20 rule, Richard Koch, or Living the 80-20 Way was my first exposure to it. And basic idea for me to take away from that is there's usually one thing that you can focus on that will get you a better result than trying to get the same result from doing 3 things or 5 things or 10 things. So, I learned there was one thing that would work best for me at different phases of my blogging. And that was maybe it was reaching out to other bloggers at the start and building those relationships. And then afterwards, it was getting people onto my podcast because that would often lead to them linking to that episode on my blog. And then later on, it was more about doing joint venture campaigns to launch products because all these affiliates would promote my blog content and grow my email list. But during those periods, that was the one thing that did the best for me. So I think, for a person listening to this, you got to ask yourself, what's one thing you can do that taps into some kind of existing advantage you have, a lowest hanging fruit opportunity? Are you just good at something? Maybe you are really good at hashtags on Instagram, and you should just try and use only Instagram hashtagging to get people to those blog posts, to get them to sign up to your email list or buy your stuff. Or maybe you're really good at getting PR and you should just go hard on trying to get as much exposure because you have a great story, and that will get a lot of, articles written about you on Business Insider, on Time Magazine, on Forbes, whatever it is that your space is in. And, you got to figure out what that is. But I would, again, go deep rather than wide. That's always the answer I find as a starting point. You can go wide when you're huge and you've got an army going wide for you. But when you're small, you've got to go deep. And that's for marketing, that's for content creation, that's for product specificity, that's for how you live your life as well. You can't do lots of different things. You probably got to get up and do the same things over and over again in order to make things work. So that to me is the answer.
Cool. Perfect. Couldn't agree more. And then final question about the technical side of things. Actually, there's one more maybe. How do you know what to write about? How do you come up with new ideas? You've been writing for 15 years now. There can't be that many things left in your list
Don't
that you
say
haven't.
Broken fridge. Don't say broken fridge.
Other appliances, perhaps.
Yeah. I've never had a problem with this whole writer's block or lack of ideas.
Yeah.
I've always find that funny because I think if you're living a life, you're constantly having conversations and observing things out there. that could trigger a story. For me, it was always the other way around. I just didn't have the time or the energy to actually get every idea down, especially as things grew, because suddenly you're creating product and suddenly you're doing things with partners, and suddenly, you've just got a bigger business. You got to do hiring and training and all of that. So you get less and less time to write. So I think for the person who might be feeling any sense of writer's block, you just have to start thinking more like a writer, content creator, and listen to this podcast. What's an idea you took away from it? How does it apply to your business? There's an article idea. Every single podcast that's ever been released on Exposure Ninja will have a topic for a blog post. If I go through your back catalog, then there's my podcast, and there's all these blog posts. That I think would probably get boring eventually, but if you need ideas, there's ideas there. I get ideas of catching the bus in the metro, so and that may be more of a muscle you just need to build up, really starting to look at the world as a source of ideas for content, especially that concept of connecting real life to your product or your service, whatever it is you sell. So I'm actually going through an interesting experience with this, because I'm selling email. Like, we have a human being that takes over other people's email accounts. So we do email for other people, providing a human being. And this is a very specific thing we do. And I'm, sitting here going, how can I write new blog posts always related to this one service that we do? Because if anything, it just gets a bit dry for me to constantly write about that same idea over and over again. And so I can see how, eventually you kind of start, potentially I'd say it's not a problem of coming up with ideas. It's just you as a content creator might be going, I'm really getting over talking about, how this connects to helping people with email, over and over again. But like for my blogging career, it was so much more of a big idea. It's that idea of, breaking free from having a job. It's about mindset. It's about productivity. Then there's all these things around product creation. There's marketing. There's so many different aspects to making that work. And I can take, email, if I just open it up a little bit more and make it more of a lifestyle concept, what's email stopping you from doing each day? I can go more narrow. What specific pieces of software can you use with your email? So it's quite easy to unpack a very narrow subject and look at the things it impacts, look at the tools you need to play with in order to do that thing, and constantly be coming up with content ideas. And of course, if all else fails, you just hire someone to do your content for you, and you get your content manager, which I'm sure you guys have on your team. I think I spoke to one via email before speaking to you. So
probably did. Yeah. That's a great point. And I've started doing a personal vlog recently, which I really, really enjoy. And at the start, I was like, I'll come up with like 5 ideas of things I want to post about. And then I'd done those 5. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do after that. But the great thing is that your life has moved on. So, hey, this other thing has happened. And like you say, it's a muscle. It's just being tuned to any opportunity, isn't it? Like, that just happened. I could quickly make a blog about that, or let me just write it down in my blog list. And then you'll come back to it later. So there is enough happening in day-to-day life that will be able to fuel your blog. You've just got to be kind of open-minded to it, I guess.
Yeah. I think one of the things I recommend people do too, especially if you're just starting with this, because sometimes when you hear us talk like this and then you apply it, you're like, okay, now I've got too many ideas. Thanks, guys. Now, what do I actually do first? Like this, I can write about anything. There's so many amazing topics. And I like to bring it back to, there's usually, especially with people who are trying to help people solve a problem with their knowledge. This really applies there, but it could apply for physical products, services, software as well. There's usually a 10-step process to go through to get from where you are to where you want to be, thinking about your target customer, of course. So I would suggest to people, when you're planning that first maybe 10 blog posts, to look at those as a kind of a mini sequence. Think about, how would you take your audience through 10 steps to solve their problem? And I really mean solve it. I mean, give away the kitchen sink here, tell them all your secrets. It's 10 blog posts, so you only have a certain amount of space. Even if that feels like you're giving away too much and you want to sell a course afterward, trust me, it's always better to give away too much and not enough. So those people will be really interested in your course. Same, if you're selling a piece of software, you give away 10 pieces of advice. And of course, there's going to be many times where you're saying, well, our software will help you do this part in the process. It's going to really reinforce the use of your tool. Same with my company with email. It's like, I can look at the 10 steps to start outsourcing your email. But during that, I can say, you know what? You don't have to do any of this. We have a person who can do it for you. So you teach and then you offer a solution. And that's a great way to start. And then, you've got that place you can send people to. I think this is really important because when you're beginning, you don't have, say, a handout or a free download. And it's nice to just say, hey, I've got this great 10-part series of blog posts that'll take you from A to Z. I think it's one of the easiest things to create at the beginning. It feels good to get that content out there. And it's just like you have a destination on the internet that you can be proud of and feel confident saying, go to my website, check this stuff out. You'll benefit from it. So that's where I would start, with your content creation.
Awesome advice, Yaro. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your advice today. Where can people find you and follow you and check out this sick email management service, which I have to say is one of the best ideas ever. I've got someone who manages my emails at Exposure Ninja, and they're probably my favorite person in the entire world. So I can certainly vouch for the process.
That's good. I was about to ask you, Tim, who does your email? So that'll save me asking that question. The obvious place is my blog. So we changed it. It used to be called Entrepreneur's Journey for those who might know me for a long time. But last year it became just Yaro, YARO.blog. Or you can just Google Yaro, YARO. That will find it. And if you do need someone to take over your email, inboxdone.com. Inbox and done. And check out what we offer there.
Dude, if I Google Yaro, I find you. Is that right?
Give it a go. I don't know what's like in the UK at the moment.
Sick.
Let me know.
You got that first name search visibility like Seth Godin. I love it. Good stuff.
There's an Indian movie star with this shows called Yaro that started to rank the videos above me and things like that. I don't know what you're getting in the UK, but yeah, it's a battle, let's say, put it that way.
Well, if you need any help with SEO. Cool.
Thanks.
Yaro, thank you so much, buddy.
Appreciate it, Tim. It was fun.